We are here with a panel with our FinOps Ambassadors, and it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Tammy Burnitt, Deana Solis, Eric Mulartrick, and our moderator and governing board member, Campos.
One more. Do we need one more? Deana, do you have? There you go. All right. Is this coming through?
Anybody nervous?
Testing. Can you hear me? Yes. All right.
It works right there. Moderate.
Do you want this one now?
I'll hand it to you. Checking. Let's do that. All right. We're good. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. These are smart, accomplished people that I'm going to try to stay out of the way of and do my best to facilitate. So quick welcome, show of hands, who here has helped establish their FinOps practice in your organization? All right, nearly 100%. Of those, who's just started out, maybe within the last 6 months or so? All right, so everybody on this side. I'm glad we've segregated the room that way. If you raise your hand over here, move over here immediately. Last show of hands. Who feels stuck in that process? They've hit whatever form of maturity they've got, and they're struggling to get to the next level. All right, fair mix. All right, that's helpful context for us as we kind of navigate some of these tips and tricks. So there we are again. We look almost like that. That was me 20 years ago. No, not quite. All right. So let's start here. What does FinOps even mean to us collectively? But I think, you were going to answer that one, so I'm going to hand it to you.
Wait, no, actually, all of us are going to answer that. And what I'll do is just pick this up. If we can go back one slide real quick before we do the what it means to us. We did a quick intro of just who we are, and I think that how we got here and how we figured out what FinOps means to us really does speak to what our roles are now, what roles we've been in order to get to defining FinOps. A lot of us have been doing this before we called it FinOps, right? Has anyone, all four of us, before it was called FinOps, we were really involved in the practice of riding the ship on the business of technology, right? So I'm Deana Solis. I've been in technology for about 30 years. Everything from retail electronics to healthcare IT, and now in my role at Smarsh, it's my second FinOps role, but my first one with an actual title of it. I'm a FinOps engineer, but I do everything from the perspective of someone who has the intention of starting a practice because it's a team sport. That was last year's thing. FinOps is a team sport, and it continues to be. So that's how I approach it. I do want to let Tammy and Eric introduce themselves too.
Hi, I'm Tammy Burnitt, and my FinOps journey is similar to Deana. It starts way back, probably 30 years or more. That's painful to say, but back in the day of mainframes and Himalayans and data centers and things like that, and then it kind of moved progressively into hybrid. But I'm in my first FinOps role. I actually founded FinOps at Shell in 2018. Predates the book a little bit, but it's continually evolving. And that was for those of you that haven't had to do that yet, or you're in the throes of it. Hopefully I can help you share some insight into that. But I think to Deana's point, it's a different journey, and what is FinOps? It looks different to everybody. It depends on what size company you work for and maybe what type of company. I've worked primarily, a lot of my career was with a large computer manufacturer, and also in energy and chemical. And so, that might look a little different depending on what industry you're in, or if you're one cloud versus multiple cloud. So that's kind of been my journey.
Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Mulartrick. I work for a company called Boomi. and I've been there for about 6.5 years. Previous to that, I was actually a network engineer, setting up network infrastructure for a company called Traffic.com. And then eventually I worked for IBM managing infrastructure as well. And then I came to Boomi leading the infrastructure and operations group and responding to on-call escalations and all that fun stuff to make sure the Boomi platform is up and running. About I think it was 2019, I discovered FinOps, and for us, it was all about getting the most value out of the resources that we were using within AWS, which we had migrated to back in 2018, so a little bit after. And I actually created a role for myself about 5 years ago, where I was able to, excuse me, we had a new VP come in, and I pitched to him the idea of FinOps, and he said, go with it, and I've been doing it ever since, and I've enjoyed it ever since. But I've always been passionate about reducing waste, even back in my old days of getting rid of like old telecom circuits, if anybody remembers those fun days.
Those were fun days. Yes, we're old enough to do that. So you all kind of touched on this a little bit briefly. Anything you want to add into that? What does FinOps even mean to us? And I know all of you have some good insights in that regard. Who wants to go first? Let's go this direction. We'll go back.
So what does FinOps mean to us? I mean, let's talk about this convention for a second, right? There's a lot of weird people like us. Like, it's nice to be able to actually talk with folks who understand, like, oh my goodness, I turn the lights off when I go to sleep at night, right? It's just, for me, it's all about the togetherness, and that falls into what I do at Boomi, like bringing people together. We're having conversations with each other. We're talking about how we can go fast, but to make sure that we're doing it in an efficient way, so we're not necessarily throwing money out the door.
Great. Deana.
That's a really good way of saying it. Now I'm going to change my answer. So what FinOps even means to me is actually along those lines, when we are doing this practice of building a collaboration muscle, I think it's a practice of finding collaborators who have previously been invisible and making visible the ways to collaborate with each other. Because it's as much as we're involved with cloud costs that are directly visible by, or that are directly impacted by the activities of one group, the visibility of how that impacts the entire organization is so far downstream and not in real time unless you intentionally make it visible. And I think that's what the practice of FinOps is.
I would agree. I think for FinOps, for me, I mean, I speak about this in a large scale, from coming from a Fortune 500 company. And so, when I get asked a lot, what is FinOps and why do I need this, right? And I said, well, FinOps is about enablement and education. I heard somebody say this in a previous session. We're not there to do the FinOps, right? Some of us have very, very small teams. We're there to create a framework and, an accountability and understanding of what are you doing in the cloud and how does that have impacts on other things, and then what is your role in that? So I liken to say evangelization. And so what I did is kind of built a community of practice, but it's bringing those people into the fold, as you said, Deana, and creating that collaborative muscle, and I love that. I'm going to borrow that. That's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to get people into the movement, that is FinOps, and kind of cascade that across your organization now, no matter how large or how small. That's kind of really what it's about.
That's great. It says we got a lot of folks who are kind of early on in that journey and or maybe even feeling stuck there. This is a little follow-up addendum to this question, which is, what are some, assumptions, expectations you may have had entering this process as you started rolling it out and driving adoption that turned out to be wrong? You had to shift gears on. We can come down down the reverse order. Tammy, you want to go first?
And I don't skirt away from this. I'm going to give the same answer that I gave in a podcast recently. My assumption was that everyone was going to be collaborative and not competitive. So that was probably the biggest assumption, is that everybody...
Which persona name specifically was not collaborative with you?
Let's just say
This is a hard-hitting session.
hard-hitting session. Let's just say there's a variety of personas, but you don't you're trying to do a great thing here, and you're trying to control and reduce the amount of spend in the cloud, and you're bringing great information. I always say it's unflattering. So me walking into this thinking, oh, everyone's going to be so happy that I'm bringing them this data, and you can be a friend or a foe, and I liken it to like #friendly FinOps, but that's really, I think that was my biggest assumption, is that everyone is going to be so happy about this and they're going to want to do it. And no, that was not my reality. And so that was probably the biggest wow factor.
That was definitely a big one. And just to build on that point, one of the reasons that I think I assumed there was going to be collaboration was because collaboration looks different from organization to organization based on what the broader culture allows for collaboration. If you're familiar with Conway's Law, organizations that develop systems tend to duplicate their own communication patterns in whatever systems they build. So if their communications are very hierarchical, if you can only get something done through a ticket system that has an approval process in it, then chances are collaboration is going to have some friction. So I think important thing that I learned also with the assumption that people would be collaborative was that we've got to be really honest with ourselves about what friction we should expect, and not lose sight of the fact that we want to collaborate, but also meet people where they are. And I think that I'll come back to that if we want to go deeper. But
My assumption was that in partnering with finance initially, that they were going to be an ally and not look at right-sizing and reserved instances and be like, all right, I see that big number, I'm going to make that your new budget, right? Like that was a little scary. So you have to backtrack and say, well, I see what you're seeing here in this system. I mean, more or less, we're letting the fox in the hen house, right? But you need to make sure that they understand the business context, right? Because they're just looking at numbers. So you have to explain that. And that really was the establishment of the Boomi FinOps working directly with finance.
And I think we got, that was all good segues to the next one around the relevant personas that we're trying to collaborate with in this regard. We talked a little bit about winning over naysayers who aren't paying attention to the systems you're trying to roll out and the collaborative dynamics here. We picked on finance. That's great. Another hard-hitting one here.
Procurement.
As a CTO, you can pick on leadership here. You can throw the darts this way if you need to. Okay. Oh, Deana. All right. Be gentle. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Let's see. We're snake casing back. Go ahead.
Well, first off, how many folks like to work with procurement?
Wow. We got a couple. We got a couple procurement people back there, clearly raised their hands. Oh, we got another. We love procurement.
So I agree. Procurement people are awesome, but why so few? Like, why are we all afraid of procurement? I'm just asking rhetorically. It's a scary word. What? Commitment? Yeah. Yeah, so friction. But in working with all the personalities, I've actually found that working with procurement has been very enjoyable for our business. Because number one, they usually don't understand like the technical aspect of what you're looking to do with either a cloud provider, a SaaS company, so on and so forth. So I found that when you enable them and you work as, like, I'm really good at playing the good cop, like talking to vendors, schmoozing the vendors, and then the procurement person is the enemy, right? So, you know, good cop, bad cop, but the procurement person will always beat them up and have them scared to the point where, you know, they're gonna give you a good discount, and I'll, you know, talk to them on the side, oh, here's how the process goes, right? That was kind of eye-opening for me, like, so I encourage everybody here, build that, you know, the togetherness with the procurement person. They can be your ally here. I'll stop there. That's good.
I wasn't gonna pull in leadership, but you know, what I will say about having executive sponsorship, not only up through the organization that you may happen to be centered in, so your CTO, but maybe it's your CFO, maybe it's your COO, depending on the size again and just how your organization is positioned in your industry, right? So, but here's the thing: when you get hired as a person who is an expert as in the practice of FinOps, with a couple of certifications, some hardware that says so, for all of those of you who have the professional badge, it's one thing to show up with that, and quite another to actually be empowered. And that empowerment has to come with some kind of support and some kind of reality. The reality for some of us is that we may walk into it with some imposter syndrome because no one has set up a FinOps practice here before. And I know how in theory, but this is going to be an experiment. And what we sometimes fail to do is actually talk with the C-level, the executive level leaders who have come in and said to our HR and talent acquisition that we need a role. We need a new role card, and it needs to say Senior FinOps Engineer. It needs to be FinOps Lead, Principal FinOps Analyst, something, FinOps, blah, blah. But then they say, okay, I've done my work. I can go back to my regular duties, but we don't keep them engaged as that practitioner. We've got to keep that executive engaged and let them know, hey, I'm a team of one still. When is it going to be a team of 2 or 3? What does that look like as we're experimenting with tools and practices and centers of excellence or communities? When we're doing that and we're not engaged with our executive, we miss an opportunity to ask, am I headed in the right direction? What does success look like for the organization? Because I'm now in the weeds. I'm now devoted to updating my policies. I don't have the 40,000-foot view of what the impact is. And it may be that I just need to put my head down and keep writing those YAML policies until the next quarterly review to get some measurement of what that activity has actually done, right? And it may be that however your organization is structured, if it does happen to be a hierarchical organization, you are going to need to lean on your leadership to communicate some things downward, which you have already communicated upward and to the side. That was a really long answer. Go ahead, Tammy.
No, unfortunately, this is winning over naysayers. This is something that's very near and dear to me. And, I agree with the whole, you may have initial sponsorship from your leadership, but, then you still have to win over the naysayers, all the other personas, right? Because that's just one of many personas, right? And I have a kind of clear-cut example. You have your FinOps, and then you have all the other personas. And so sometimes when you're trying to sell an idea or a concept or domain or capability of FinOps, it's a good idea to bring in some external measures. So benchmark yourself against your industry peers. Use some FinOps Summit data. Go out and talk to your peers in the the FinOps org, right? Build up some kind of matrix to benchmark yourself, and because you're never not selling FinOps. You're gonna. I look at winning over naysayers statement, and I'm like, you're gonna do this many, many, many times in the course of your FinOps program. So just getting kind of resourceful with how to win over people. And my example was rate optimization. We're trying to implement this during COVID, and we all know what happened during COVID, and energies companies felt it really badly, in a bad way. And so it was just coming in with your expertise. This is the way to go. I think visuals say a lot when you're trying to win over naysayers, but also bringing in that external data, so you can you're not saying, well, this is just what we need to do. This is where we are compared to our peers. Look at where you are in the maturity process, or success, measures of success, crawl, walk, and run. And so that's kind of a nice way to kind of say, well, I'm not just talking about my internal company. Now I'm going to measure myself against my peers and see where we are. And sometimes your leader will come back and say, well, we're different. But we're not. We're all working in the cloud, and we're all trying to figure out how to spend less money in the cloud. And so we may do things differently industry-wise. The concept is the same in the cloud.
That's great. So let's transition a little bit here and how you set FinOps adoption up for success. We talked about some assumptions that we may have gotten wrong. Maybe some, and you, Deana, you kind of teed this up a little bit on Conway's law. There's a organizational pathology that we're all kind of entering into, and we're trying to build a practice outside of that, and having to adapt along the way. Are there any sort of paradigms that, or any anti-patterns maybe that have existed that you've had to fight against, unfold? Any success stories around that? Stories from the front lines?
I'll go first. So when I first set up the practice years ago, I'm very big in working with each of the personas that we saw on the previous screen and learning what they're motivated by, because finance is motivated by what? Money, right? Saving money. Engineering leadership, motivated by reducing costs so we can reinvest in the business and I can hire more staff. Procurement, we already talked about procurements. And then our senior leadership executive, right? They just want to make sure that we are getting that most value out of the cloud resources that we spend. But for me, establishing the relationships one at a time. First I started with finance. I got them out of the hen house, and then I was able to work with them and be like, look, we have opportunity here to buy some reservations, or we could buy some RDS reservations up front. Usually, we're not much of an upfront payment type of company, but in some cases it makes sense, when you're 10%, extra discount. So we would work together to kind of model out what our costs would be. And they also care very much about forecasting, right? Making sure that we're, accurate within the forecasting. In working with engineering leaders, once we had that critical visibility based upon a tag strategy, we were able to work with them and be like, here is your spend. This is where you're currently at. Where do you think you're going to be at? And most of the time it's, well, what does the previous data show us? So, we kind of work together to extrapolate out the budgets and then get them the data in somewhat near real time so they can understand and make decisions quickly about whether or not they can clamp down on some spending and potentially reinvest in the business. And I feel like I'm rambling, so I'm going to stop here and allow others.
Well, follow-up question to that. I'm curious on the tagging efforts you did with engineering. Was that outside in? Was that collaborative in that definition? How did you approach that?
Collaborative. So, and I know Deana is making a joke about NetApp over here. Anyway, yeah, she was our TAM a long time ago at this point. But at the end of the day, it was working together. I sit within engineering. So because I'm in engineering, it's very easy to go out and talk to the teams and say, okay, what do we care about? Is it the stack name? Is it the environment? Is it, I guess, the region, right? We have a few different tags that we use. The Boomi contact, that's the who. But working together so we could get that visibility. So we applied it into the infrastructure as code to be able to use that repeatably going forward. And up until recently, we could identify 96% of our spend to a cost center.
That's great. We'll do another snap poll here on this topic, because there's a wide array of techniques here. So let's see. Show of hands today at current state, you have an aligned tagging taxonomy across FinOps, engineering, and product. That's good. That's maybe majority in this room. Okay. Now, who maybe followed Eric's pattern, highly collaborative in defining that both personas, or maybe 3 personas with product, were involved in its definition? Far less. All right, then how many did FinOps or finance side force that into engineering and they just had to adapt? How many went that direction? Interesting. Small. How about the other direction? Engineering told finance what to do. All right, about the same as the other way. Interesting. Deana.
So the question, how do you set FinOps adoption for success? I think we avoided doing just a slide full of a laundry list because we could go on and on and on about how to set it up if we could do it over again. But I think the main thing is, I will just go back to clarity is kindness. Be very clear on what you're expecting from FinOps and be able to work with your FinOps professionals, to work with your FinOps teams, and the folks who are going to be in that community of practice in your other areas of your business. Clarity on what you expect from them and clarity on what success looks like. That's how you set them up for success. You don't just say, you're FinOps now, go. Because what you'll find is we'll come to these conferences, we'll read some books, and we'll have all kinds of ideas, but that doesn't really help us meet our stakeholders where they are. It doesn't really tell us what we're going to be measured on and how to measure our own success from the activities that we've had, including tagging, by the way. I mean, if you didn't already use some kind of KPI around your tagging coverage, then I mean, it's one of the first things that you should be measuring. But if you didn't have the clarity that that was an expectation, then maybe you built workarounds to solve problems that were further downstream. But you know, that whole idea of setting someone up for success involves being clear on what you want as an organization, how your organizational objectives align and are executed through the metrics that you're measuring FinOps on. So,
I couldn't agree more. I mean, a company the size of Shell, you know, you can deploy your FinOps program, and you have a charter, you get your sponsor, you know what your inputs and outputs are, and your tools. But how do you set your business stakeholders up for success? Well, that's different. Every business, you need to get in there and understand, what is the business doing, right? What is the service in the cloud that's important to them? And then you kind of take some of those domains and capabilities, and some businesses are more mature and some businesses are not. I say this all the time. Every cloud consumer is at a different maturity level in their cloud journey. And so success looks different depending on who you're talking to, you know, in my case, whether it be upstream or downstream, or projects in technology. Are they using Databricks, or are they using high performance computing? You know, we need to figure out what that looks like for them. And then again, I go back to education and enablement. You're trying to evangelize. So once you figure out what their pain points are, then you got to figure out how to get them across the finish line, or at least close enough, right? And then once you get them across one finish line, then, you know, we start all over again, because cloud is ever evolving. But I think, you know, before you can set them up for success, you got to figure out what they're about. You need to know, why are they using what they're using? What does their business do? What is their revenue? And then how you can apply that framework lens and put it on top of it. But you're really trying to cultivate a community of practitioners, and some would disagree, but I would say get different businesses talking to each other. Sometimes they don't like to share information or they don't like to share successes, and I say this regularly. If Team A is doing something great, then Team B should definitely be talking to Team A. And so that's that kind of collaboration piece. But I think success looks different depending on who your stakeholder is, right? So you might have to tweak that a little bit.
Great point. I think since we had a fair amount of people that said they were stuck here, let's try to zoom to some Q&A here. So maybe on these next, we'll take one response from the panel, and then we'll try to get to Q&A because we're running up 10 minutes or so. So what are some ways to show progress, value, beyond just a report that you email out every week or whatever that may be? Who's got strong opinions here? Eric?
I'll just use, this is almost non-tangible, but it's a good story. So the best thing in the world is when an engineering team comes to you and says, hey, I'm looking to establish this new service. It's going to be running on managed OpenSearch. We're going to size it at this particular size right now, and we'd like to evaluate it as we start putting production workload on it to see if that is exactly what we need, because sometimes it's kind of hazy. And then once we do that, we'd like you to go buy reserved instances to lower the rate for that particular service. Not necessarily tangible, but that's something that I call out to the whole engineering organization and be like, look at what this team did. This is awesome, just to show the example.
That's a great example. Any other strong examples? I'm violating my own rule. I said one, but I saw a lot of nodding.
Just real quick, because what Eric is describing is what I kind of refer to a lot as FinOps literacy. Like when other people who don't necessarily focus on it all day long already have the mindset to where they have that shift left mindset to where they're already asking the questions before they're doing their architectural planning, before they're choosing their tools or infrastructure. That's a big deal.
I'd have to agree with Eric. I think when you've kind of evangelized your community and they're coming to you saying, hey, I've got this FinOps squad and we're doing this and we save this much money, and we have a community practice meeting every month and we invite those people back to present. And those are kind of the proud moments where your community starts to grow and they're taking those learnings and they're putting them in action. We kind of call it #FinOps in action, but that's kind of the proud moment that is beyond, a graph or a chart or whatever. It's just, the numbers that JR put up today. We kind of do the same thing at Shell. We measure how the community is growing, right?
Yep, that's great. All right, this time I'm serious. We're going to do one on this. What's the best way to improve skills and knowledge? Tammy.
Well, obviously certifications are one way, but for me, I think the best way is to get involved in the FinOps org community, join a work group, right? Get involved. I talk to Scott Lynn a lot at Chevron. We're not giving away trade secrets, but we're in the same industry and we work together a lot. And that's really the best way. And just read. Work with your suppliers. They're bringing the new services online, but there's probably, it's a three-pronged approach, but certifications do work, and that professional is worth it. It's hard fought, but it's worth it.
Awesome. All right, so this is a good pivot to the audience. What we missed up here, where folks are stuck. Are we all right on the Q? Oh, beautiful. So we got the fun catch it mic.
So this
here.
is called a catch box, and as you can imagine, the first word is catch. I'm told I can throw it. The warning says do not throw at people's heads. So although I will not aim at your head, I do not play sports and offer no guarantees. Questions, I'll take them in order. Starting here, ready to catch?
You were talking about ways to kind of recognize or celebrate wins other than reports and graphs. One of the things we did is just when an engineering team would go out and save $5,000, $10,000, $70,000 a month, we would publish it in Slack or in our all hands meeting, not really from the FinOps standpoint, but hey, look what this team did with a couple of weeks of analysis and working together, and they feel good about it. So it's just a nice way for them to get the credit for a lot of the work they did in front of their peers too, which
I think
get a
those
little
are-
crowdsourcing going on.
You could also do that in all hands.
Yeah.
Just ask
Yeah.
Will about the Grinch Awards.
Yeah, Viva Engage. All that's good.
Yeah, who's next to catch? I'm not throwing it.
Building that kind of enthusiasm too, it does take time, especially if you're really early in your journey and you're still working out tagging, working out isolating your costs in some shared cost environments. Sometimes there's a lot of shared infrastructure that's difficult to isolate, and so setting targets, you may not be there right now. So the way that recognizing teams, communities of practice, might just be thanking someone publicly for coming to that FinOps community of practice meeting and asking great questions. So.
Hi, so I work in a large matrix organization. There's 50,000 people at the company, and I was hired around the same time. I'm the first FinOps person there, and I was also hired alongside an IT finance person. And what I've been finding is that there is a little bit of that competition there. Where if I come up with an idea or mention something, they kind of like block me out of results. And how do you overcome challenges where there's another role who sees their purpose kind of overlapping with yours? So, any advice?
That's such a good question. Should I?
Go for it.
So, because I don't think it's very uncommon. And in fact, it's a very natural thing to think that when you are given a task by your direct manager as an IT finance person, that is separate from whatever the goal was that the FinOps person was tasked by maybe the same leader or maybe a different one. And not knowing where the alignment is, or it's not necessarily, it's very human to sort of project an insecurity about whether you're going to be able to succeed in your goal, and try to overcompensate by, I'm going to go ahead and take this task, and I'm going to take control over it, and if I cut that person out of it, I'll get this done faster, and I will get the gold star from my leader. Tragically, that's a pattern. And when I say that organizations that build systems look at their patterns of communication, if there are these huge silos that cause those sort of patterns, the first thing you can do is recognize them and not say it's good or bad. It just is. Silos exist for a reason. They help people feel organized. They help people understand what they can predict. And you're embarking on a new practice because of new problems, and collaboration is the only way you're going to be able to work together. And that is going to be a combination of what you clarify, what you're not getting in the cooperation, and both of your leaders, even if that's the same person, having clarity on what they have created. If they've created a competition, then it's a competition. Again, not good or bad, because sometimes people call it gamifying FinOps. And seriously, some people do set their KPIs based on gamification that actually pits teams against each other competitively, and sometimes that can be very motivating if your culture is already healthy.
It was two different leaders, by the way.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I can offer a different take on this because I'm a decentralized IT anyway. So, silo is like the word of the day. So, I would say do what you do. My advice to anybody that's doing FinOps is just do it. Just do it until somebody says, I mean, I never, I asked for forgiveness later. I'm that person. So I just kind of did it. And I, started FinOps. And to this day, I still do it. And if somebody else wants to spin up a project or say that they do whatever, I'm like, if you have the hardware or, you've done something or you're in the community, but I think you have to communicate. If it's their choice whether they want to collaborate. As long as you extend an olive branch and they can choose not to come to the meeting. They can choose not to work with you, right? But I don't think there's anybody stopping you from doing FinOps. I would say if you've got a great idea, get it out there, put it in Viva Engage, put it in a newsletter. But I would say just run with it, because what you're trying to do is get the eye of a leadership that's like, this person is a go-getter, they've got great ideas, and they know how to kind of, I always say, operate across the organization. So I just kind of, the people that don't want to come along for the ride, that's okay too, but I'm still I'll communicate with you and I'll share with you, but the train is leaving the station one way or the other, right?
We have time for one more quick question, and I'm going to give it one more earnest throw. Good luck.
Yeah.
One last thing to add on that, choose your battles and document.
Oh, yeah.
First off, I know this is supposed to be a question, but I just want to say, hey, I agree with you. I started FinOps at my organization because I was just doing it. And then they said, hey, how do you think this should be done? And I wrote up a spec and they said, we'll fund a team for you. So there is value in just doing it. And what we found to be really helpful is if we helped give data to folks who were trying to solve a problem, all of a sudden they wanted to collaborate with us more. Now, my question is that was very grassroots. Where my struggle is how do I get my VPs to really care about this? How do I, because I'm not necessarily always in front of them. I know they're one of the personas, but their time is sparse, let's call it. And so how can I get in front of them more and really get them on board?
I can answer from C-suite perspective on that. So I think from an executive leadership persona, the mapping to business outcomes are the needles they're looking for, right? This could be something as simple as which teams even have a forecast, which teams are actually hitting their budget, whose trends are positive or negative, right? And I can tie it back even the question before, being able to just stack small successes on top of each other. Building momentum takes a long time, but if you're able to do that and communicate, document how those successes are going, that's the dashboard execs are looking at, like who's improving and where do we have small patterns of success that we can fuel, right? They might not have any clarity about how you're doing it, but they see the outcome and they're like, well, we just want more of that. I want to pour fuel into that engine. How do I do it? And then that's often where the connection downline comes. Like who's driving this? I want to talk.
Please provide a FinOps over budget round of applause for Eric, Deana, Tammy, and Kyle.
Thank you all.
Thanks for watching. Check out more FinOps X 2024 content on our YouTube channel on the 2024 playlist. Support our channel by liking, subscribing, clicking the notification bell, and by leaving comments and questions for our speakers. We appreciate your support.